The sun bled across the sky like a slow fire, painting the dry plains in copper and rose. Heat shimmered off the packed earth of Great Butte's main street, where every board and brick seemed to sigh with the day's exhaustion. A whistle drifted on the evening wind, long, low, and mournful, rising from the rails that cut the horizon like a blade. Beneath it came another sound, steadier and closer, the rhythmic thunder of horses approaching from the west. Evelyn Price stepped onto the porch of the general store, a wicker basket hooked in the crook of her arm. Her skirts were dusted the color of the road, and sweat darkened the blue collar of her dress, but her back was straight as a rifle barrel. The townsfolk moved aside when she passed. They always did. Not because she was feared. Evelyn had never raised her voice in anger, but because the quiet set of her jaw hinted at a strength that could not be bargained with. Widowhood had sharpened her edges rather than dulled them. 3 years of drought, debt, and lonely nights had not yet broken her. She intended to keep it that way. From the shadow of the livery, young Lucas watched her with eyes the color of wet stone. He was 16, thin from growth and chores, the sleeves of his shirt rolled to reveal wrists darker than the rest of him from sun and dust. Folks in town still whispered that he had been a sickly child, lungs too weak for the hard air of the frontier. Yet as he leaned against the hitch rail, his posture was steady, and the hands clasped loosely before him bore the calluses of someone who worked more than dawn to dusk. He said little, but his silence carried its own gravity, like the still water of a deep well. The hoofbeats grew louder until the windows rattled. A column of riders emerged from the setting sun, silhouettes sharp against the blaze. 10 men in dust-coated coats and black hats, rifles slung easy across their saddles. At their head rode a tall figure with a hawk's profile and eyes pale as river ice. Harlan Pike had the kind of face that remembered no kindness. He didn't slow as they entered the street. He merely guided his horse straight down the center, boots tapping the stirrups in time with the hoofbeats. The town seemed to shrink in their wake. Doors clicked shut, curtains fell. Evelyn stood her ground. Pike reined near the well, scanning the storefronts like a moon counting cattle. "Evenin', Great Butte," he said, voice smooth as polished iron. "I reckon you've all heard the news. The railroad's coming through, and the company's ready to make this easy. Sign over your parcels, take fair coin, and you'll walk away richer than you ever dreamed." No one answered. A dry gust stirred the dust, carrying the faint scent of creosote and distant rain. Pike's smile thinned. "Or," he continued, "you can make it hard. And we'll take the land anyway." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mother clutching her child, an old blacksmith shifting his weight. One by one, neighbors stepped forward, papers in hand. A rancher with tired eyes gave a resigned nod. A storekeeper reached for his ledger. The sound of pens scratching on parchment filled the hush like insects buzzing in tall grass. Evelyn didn't move. Pike noticed. He dismounted with the slow confidence of a man certain of his power, boots crunching on grit as he approached her. "Mrs. Price," he said, dipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Fine little spread you've got east of town. Good grazing land. Prime spot for a siding, wouldn't you say? I've got a contract right here. Just your signature and we're all square." Evelyn met his pale eyes without flinching. "My husband built that ranch with his own hands," she said. "I'll not see it stolen by men who ride in under threat." Pike chuckled low in his throat. "Stolen? Ma'am, I'm offering you money. That's business, not theft." "It's theft when a gun's behind the offer," she replied. The street held its breath. Pike's men shifted in their saddles, the leather creaking like old bones. Pike studied her face, a flicker of something, admiration or annoyance, passing across his own. "Think careful," he said at last. "The railroad doesn't wait for sentiment. Tomorrow, next week, next month, makes no difference to me. That land will be ours." He turned sharply and swung into the saddle. The riders wheeled as one, hoofs kicking up a veil of dust that settled across Evelyn's dress like a warning. They headed for the open plain, their silhouettes swallowed by the burnished light until only the fading drum of hooves remained. When the echoes died, the townsfolk exhaled as if waking from a spell. One neighbor stepped toward her. "Evelyn, maybe best to sign. Ain't Northwest stopping the iron road. They'll come back, and harder." She lifted her chin. "Let them," she said, voice quiet but carrying. "My land is mine." Lucas appeared beside her then, silent as a shadow. He held her basket without being asked, his gray eyes following the trail of dust the riders left behind. A faint muscle worked in his jaw. "They'll be back," he murmured. "I know," she said. As they walked toward the edge of town, the sky deepened to a bruised purple, and the first stars glimmered like distant campfires. Coyotes yipped from the hills. Lucas kept his gaze on the distant canyon, where the land broke into jagged red walls and black ravines. The setting sun caught the faint scar along his left forearm, a mark from endless nights of practice when the world slept. Only he and the canyon knew how often he had crept out with his father's old rifle, learning the language of distance and wind. His mother had never asked, but she must have known. Her glance toward him carried neither surprise nor reproach, only a quiet recognition of the weight already settling on his shoulders. The town faded behind them until it was just another cluster of lanterns swallowed by dusk. Ahead lay the long trail home, a ribbon of pale dust beneath a rising moon. Evelyn walked with the measured stride of someone who had weathered every kind of storm. Lucas matched her pace, his hand brushing the worn leather sling of the rifle strapped to his back, the metal cool against the evening air. Far off, the railroad whistle sounded again, long and low, a promise and a threat carried on the night wind. Moonlight washed the plains in silver, turning every thorn and stone into a shard of glass. The Price Ranch lay silent beneath that cold glow, the wind slipping over mesquite and fence posts with a whisper like drawn steel. Evelyn stood by the well, her shawl pulled tight, eyes narrowed at the dark line of the ridge where shadows moved like smoke. Something was wrong. The pump handle groaned when she worked it, spitting only a trickle of muddy water before giving a hollow gasp. She tasted grit on her tongue and knew the enforcers had struck their next blow. By dawn the truth was plain. The creek that fed her well was dammed upstream, a fresh wall of timber braced by iron spikes. Pike's men had been quick and quiet, leaving no more sign than boot prints in the sand and the faint smell of lamp oil. Without that flow, her herd would thirst and the pasture grass would turn to tinder. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and those who might have helped her yesterday now kept their distance, shutters drawn, fearing the railroad's wrath. Evelyn rode to town anyway. Dust devils chased her horse across the flats, and the sun bared its teeth over the horizon. At the mercantile porch the townsfolk watched her dismount with eyes that slid away when she met them. A bucket tipped in the breeze, clanging like a warning bell. Harlan Pike waited by the hitching rail, his coat unbuttoned to show the glint of a revolver. He smiled as if greeting an old friend. "Mornin', Mrs. Price. Mighty dry out there, ain't it? Water's a scarce thing when men get careless with their rights." "You cut that creek," she said, voice steady though her heart hammered. "That water's mine by charter." Pike spread his hands in mock innocence. "Charters are paper. Paper burns. The company's laying track come spring, and the land's gotta be clear. I'd rather buy than burn, but the end's the same." Her jaw clenched, the words of her late husband echoing in memory. This ground is blood and sweat. Hold it, no matter who comes riding. She thought of his rough hands guiding hers over the fence posts, the quiet pride when their first calf stood on trembling legs. That life would not be bartered away. "You'll answer for this," she said, mounting again. "Law or no law, you'll answer." Pike's eyes caught the morning light, cold and amused. "I reckon the desert answers to no one." He tipped his hat and turned, leaving the threat hanging like a rattler's hiss. That evening, the ranch was cloaked in a silence deeper than the canyon. Evelyn walked the fence line beneath a sky thick with stars. Each hoofbeat of her grazing cattle sounded too loud, each rustle of brush a warning. The dry wind carried the smell of iron and mesquite, sharp as a blade. Fear crept into her bones, but she pushed it aside. She would not let the land see her falter. Inside the house, Lucas cleaned the old rifle by lantern light. The metal caught the glow like liquid fire. He worked with a precision that made her chest tighten, a boy's face hardened by a man's focus. She opened her mouth to speak, to forbid him, but the words withered. Something in his eyes stopped her, a calm so deep it seemed older than the hills. "Sleep soon," she said instead. He nodded, but when she woke in the night his pallet was empty. A faint scuff of boots led toward the canyon. She stepped to the doorway, the cold air cutting through her nightdress, and listened. Far off, a single shot cracked across the darkness, sharp and sure. Then another. The echoes rolled like distant thunder, fading into the vast silence. By the next day, whispers drifted through Great Butte like tumbleweed. A lantern light seen high on the canyon rim. Echoes of rifle fire at midnight. Some claimed a ghost practiced up there, the spirit of a soldier lost to the war, or perhaps the desert itself learning to fight. Others swore they'd glimpsed a figure at dawn, tall and lean, the rifle gleaming like a silver branch against the rising sun. Evelyn said nothing. She carried water from a neighbor who dared to lend a bucket, her shoulders aching, her heart heavy with a mix of dread and strange, fierce pride. Each night she left the lantern burning in the window, a beacon for the sun she could not stop. And each night, as the silver moon climbed the canyon walls, the faint rhythm of gunfire whispered back across the dark, steady as a heartbeat. The afternoon heat lay heavy over the Price Ranch, the kind that made the air shimmer and the ground crack. Evelyn sensed trouble long before it arrived. The cattle shifted restlessly near the dry creek, tails flicking, ears twitching to some distant rhythm. Then came the faint tremor beneath her boots, a pulse through the earth that no breeze could explain. She stepped to the porch, wiping her palms on her apron, and saw them cresting the ridge, a dark knot of riders backlit by a copper sky. Harlan Pike led the way, his coat flaring like a shadow's wing. Behind him the enforcers fanned out, rifles slung low, faces hard with dust and sun. They rode without haste, the slow inevitability of a storm. Evelyn's stomach tightened, but she stayed where she was, the porch rail firm beneath her grip. They didn't bother with greetings. Pike swung down first, boots raising a puff of red grit. "Afternoon, Mrs. Price," he drawled, though his eyes were winter cold. "Thought we'd pay a neighborly visit. See how a lady manages without water." One of his men kicked the gate open with a clang. Another swung a hammer, smashing a corner post until the fence sagged like broken ribs. Evelyn's pulse hammered, but she stepped forward, voice steady. "You'll answer for every board you break." Pike tilted his head. "You gonna fetch the sheriff? He signed with the company 2 weeks ago. Papers in my pocket." He gestured, and 2 riders dismounted, circling the barn. A moment later smoke billowed up, thick, acrid, the smell of burning hay stabbing her nose. "Stop it." She lunged toward them, but Pike's arm shot out, iron strong, and shoved her back against the porch post. The impact rattled her teeth. Rough fingers clamped her shoulders, pinning her long enough for another mun to shove her to the ground. The board scraped her cheek. She tasted copper and grit. "Careful," Pike said lazily. "Don't bruise the merchandise." Evelyn forced herself upright, brushing dust from her skirt, hiding the tremor in her hands. Her ribs ached where they'd gripped her, and a bruise blossomed across her cheekbone, but her eyes burned hotter than the fire behind the barn. "This land is mine," she said, voice like flint. "You'll never own it." Pike regarded her as if studying a puzzle he meant to solve by breaking. "The desert's patient, ma'am," he said at last. "Men aren't. Think on that before nightfall." With a sharp whistle he mounted, and the gang wheeled their horses, leaving a haze of smoke and dust in their wake. Evelyn watched until the last hoofbeat faded. The haystack was a blackened skeleton, sparks drifting upward like dying stars. Fence rails lay splintered across the yard. The cattle lowed nervously, eyes rolling white. She pressed a hand to her side where the ache throbbed and drew a slow breath. They wanted fear. She would give them nothing. The sky darkened with a strange urgency, clouds rising from the western horizon like bruises. A wall of copper dust advanced across the plain, swallowing sunlight, turning the air thick and metallic. She felt the charged hush of an approaching storm, windless, breathless, heavy with portent. As the first gust whipped the yard, she hauled the heavy lantern from its peg and carried it to the second-floor window of the house. Lucas had shown her the old signal his father used during the war. 3 long flashes, 2 short, 3 long again, asterisk danger at home star. Her bruised arm protested with each lift, but she kept the rhythm steady, the lantern's beam slicing through the copper dust like a small, defiant star. Somewhere beyond the canyon, she prayed, her son would see. The storm roared closer, sand hissing against the walls like 1,000 tiny knives. She closed the shutters and waited in the dim lamplight, her heart counting the seconds between the flashes of distant lightning and the answering crack of thunder. Memory, unbidden, rose with each rumble. Lucas at 8, his thin arms straining to lift the long rifle while his father crouched behind him. "Feel the wind, boy," Nathaniel Price had said, voice quiet as the desert night. "It speaks before the shot. Listen, and you'll never miss." He'd taught the boy to breathe with the earth, to read distance by the color of the air, to let silence stretch until the world itself seemed to pause for the bullet. She saw them again on the canyon rim at dawn, the boy's hair a dark flame in the rising sun, the father's scarred hands adjusting his grip. Nathaniel had been a scout in the war, a man who could vanish into brush and strike from shadows. He'd passed on more than skill. He'd given their son the patient heart of a hunter. When Nathaniel was taken by fever, Lucas had practiced alone. She'd hear it sometimes in the dead of night, the faint click of a rifle bolt, the soft thud of boots on packed earth as he slipped from the house. He returned before dawn with eyes a little older, a little farther away. She had wanted to stop him, to hold him to childhood, but the desert makes men early, and grief makes them sooner. The lantern guttered as a fierce gust rattled the window. She steadied it, staring into the copper maelstrom, willing the signal to pierce the storm. Out there, somewhere among the cliffs and mesquite, Lucas would see. She believed it as fiercely as she believed in the ground beneath her feet. Outside, the wind howled, tearing at the burned remains of the haystack, driving sand into every crack and seam. Yet in that chaos, Evelyn stood unshaken. The ache in her ribs, the bruise darkening her cheek, these were tokens of a battle not yet lost. The railroad men thought they had found a lone widow to break. They had not reckoned with a son who carried a dead man's precision in his steady hands, or with a mother who would light the desert itself to call him home. The storm arrived like the earth itself had chosen to rise and walk. Wind howled through the canyon mouths, dragging curtains of red sand across the plain until sky and ground became one roiling mass of copper fire. Evelyn braced the porch door with her shoulder, the lantern guttering behind her. Each gust slammed against the house like a giant's fist. Somewhere in that burning dust came the distant drumming of hooves. Shapes emerged through the swirling haze. Pike and his riders, scarves pulled tight over their mouths, eyes narrowed against the grit. Their horses tossed and snorted, manes whipped to frenzies by the gale. The men shouted to one another, but the wind shredded their words. Evelyn watched from a slit between the shutters, her heart a slow drum against her ribs. She could not tell if her signal had reached Lucas, but she prayed to every silent star that it had. The first rifle crack tore through the storm like a bolt of iron splitting the heavens. A rider at the flank jerked sideways, tumbling from his saddle without a cry. His horse screamed and bolted into the dust. The rest of the gang reined hard, eyes wide, scanning the shifting gloom. Another shot rang out, clean, sharp, deliberate. A second one pitched backward, his hat spinning into the wind. The storm swallowed the sound of his fall. Pike barked an order lost in the gale. The enforcers fanned out, rifles raised, firing blind into the crimson murk. Muzzles flared in brief, frantic bursts of light, sparks swallowed instantly by sand. The air filled with the acrid scent of powder, mingling with the metallic tang of the storm. Horses reared and bucked, their screams rising above the chaos. From the canyon rim came no sign of life, only the hiss of sand and the slow percussion of distant thunder. Then a third shot cracked, so precise it seemed to slice the wind itself. Another rider slumped, his body sliding soundless to the ground. Panic spread like wildfire. Men shouted, firing at shadows, their bullets whining harmlessly into rock and dust. Evelyn pressed her palms together, breath caught between fear and a fierce, aching hope. She knew that rhythm, that unerring cadence. Each report carried a memory, the measured breathing of a boy who had learned the language of distance, the patient stillness of a father guiding small hands along a rifle stock. Her son was out there, a ghost on the rim. Lightning forked across the sky, a jagged vein of white tearing through the red haze. For an instant the canyon walls blazed like molten copper, and on the highest ledge a silhouette appeared, tall, lean, steady as a monument. The rifle gleamed in the brief light, then vanished into shadow as thunder rolled so close it shook the house. Pike wheeled his horse, teeth bared. "Show yourself," he bellowed into the storm. "Tired." A single shot answered, clipping the brim of his hat and spinning it into the dust. His horse danced sideways, nostrils flaring. Pike's eyes burned with a rage edged by something colder, fear. More lightning, another deafening crack. A fourth man toppled, his rifle clattering against stone. The survivors huddled closer, backs to one another, eyes wild. They fired into the storm until their chambers clicked empty, the sound lost in the endless hiss of sand. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, the door banging behind her. The storm clawed at her dress, but she stood tall, face streaked with grit. "You were warned," she called, her voice carrying clear and strong despite the wind. "This land isn't yours." Pike swung toward her, fury twisting his features. "This ain't over," he shouted, but even as he spoke another crack split the air. The bullet struck the ground at his horse's hooves, throwing up a spray of red dust that blinded beast and rider alike. The animal reared, and Pike fought for control, curses lost to the gale. Through the chaos a new figure emerged from the storm's heart. Lucas strode across the yard, coat flapping like a darkwing, the old rifle balanced easy in his hands. Sand streaked his face, but his eyes were steady, cold as riverstone. The frail boy the town remembered was gone. In his place walked a marksman forged of silence and loss, each step measured, inevitable. The surviving enforcers froze, their weapons useless, their courage bled away by the storm and the precision of unseen death. One dropped his rifle and fled into the swirling dusk, another followed, stumbling over the body of a fallen comrade. Soon only Pike remained, breath ragged, hand tight on his reins. Lucas stopped 10 paces from him, the rifle leveled without tremor. "Leave," he said, voice low but carrying like a bell. "Or the next shot is yours." Pike's gaze flicked from the barrel to the boy's unflinching eyes. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the hard line of Lucas's jaw, the echo of his father's face. Something shifted in Pike's expression, a calculation turned to reluctant recognition. He spat into the dust, yanked the reins, and spurred his horse into the storm's heart, vanishing in a whirl of red sand and fading hoofbeats. Silence settled as the wind began to ease, the storm's fury bleeding away into a restless hush. The last grains of dust fell like ash. Evelyn stepped forward, her skirt trailing in the grit, and reached her son. For a heartbeat they simply looked at each other, mother and child bound by the echo of what had passed. His shoulders rose and fell with controlled breaths, the rifle still warm in his hands. "You saw the lantern," she said softly. "I saw," he answered. His voice was deeper than she remembered, calm as the canyon after rain. Thunder rumbled far off, a final punctuation to the night. Around them lay the silent proof of his aim, dark shapes half buried in sand, rifles scattered like fallen branches. The air smelled of spent powder and wet earth as the first drops of rain began to fall, hissing on the cooling stones. Evelyn touched his cheek, rough with dust, and felt the steadiness beneath. The boy who once coughed through long winters had become something else entirely, a protector carved by loss and the endless horizon. She did not speak her pride. It lived in the quiet meeting of their eyes, in the shared understanding that the desert had chosen its own justice. Above the canyon, the storm clouds tore open, revealing a blood-red sunset reborn after the chaos, streaked with veins of gold. Lucas slung the rifle across his back and turned toward the fading light, the figure of a legend already half-claimed by the wind. The storm ebbed to a restless hush, leaving the world washed in red dusk and the scent of wet iron. Dust settled like ash across the Price Ranch, muffling every sound until the only noise was the faint rattle of a loose shutter. Evelyn stepped from the porch into the eerie calm, her boots sinking in sand that had drifted knee-deep against the posts. Smoke from the burned hay hung low and bitter, a reminder of the men who had come to break her. Out by the corral, a horse stamped and snorted, reins dragging in the dirt. Beside it lay a figure twisted against the earth, Harlan Pike, his coat flung wide like a black flag. He groaned, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, his revolver lost in the drifts. The other riders were gone, their flight marked only by fading hoofprints and a single abandoned rifle half buried in the grit. The desert had swallowed them whole, leaving their leader to the silence he tried to conquer. Evelyn approached slowly, the lantern's glow casting long shadows across the ruined yard. Pike turned his head, eyes wild beneath a mask of dust and blood. "Finish it," he rasped, defiance and fear tangling in his voice. She studied him for a long moment, the memory of his men's hands on her shoulders still burning her skin. The part of her that had endured drought and loss felt the pull of vengeance, sharp as the smell of gunpowder. Yet something deeper stilled her hand. "The desert's already judged you," she said quietly. "I'll not add to its verdict." She turned away, leaving him to the vast night. From the thinning haze a figure emerged, tall and solitary, moving with the unhurried certainty of the storm itself. Lucas stepped into the lantern circle, rifle balanced in one hand, smoke still curling from the barrel. Sand streaked his face, his hair plastered by sweat, but his eyes held the calm of an old soul. The boy she'd once cradled through fever had vanished. In his place stood a man forged in silence and fire. He stopped a few paces from her, scanning the yard with a soldier's precision. "It's over," he said, voice steady and low. Evelyn reached for him, her fingers brushing the rough fabric of his sleeve. The warmth of his arm was real, but there was a distance in his gaze that startled her more than any wound. "You came when I called," she whispered. "I heard the lantern," he answered, and a flicker of something softer touched his face, an echo of the boy he had been. "Couldn't let them take what's ours." The first stars kindled above them, cold and bright against the clearing sky. Around their feet lay the proof of what he had done, dark shapes in the sand, rifles glinting like fallen branches. Evelyn felt pride rise sharp and fierce, but it was braided with grief so deep it seemed to hollow her chest. She mourned not the men who had come to steal her land, but the quiet innocence that had left her son forever. They worked through the night without words. Together they righted the sagging fence, watered the trembling cattle, and doused the last embers of the haystack fire. When they passed the place where Pike lay, Evelyn glanced once but did not stop. The moon was breathing, though shallowly, and the desert would decide the rest. Hours slipped by like slow water. The wind softened to a gentle sigh through the mesquite, carrying the clean scent of rain. At last, when the eastern horizon paled, Evelyn and Lucas climbed a ridge behind the house. From there they watched the world grow new again. Dawn spilled across the canyon in molten gold, gilding every scarred rock and twisted pine. The train whistle sounded far off, a low lament rolling through the brightening air. Its echo mingled with the rustle of awakening birds, a song of distance and inevitability. Yet no rails cut their land, no smoke rose from a conquering engine. The ranch stood whole, an island of defiance in the endless wild. Evelyn turned to her son. His profile caught the first light, etched in bronze and shadow. She thought of Nathaniel, his steady hands, his quiet laugh, the patient lessons he'd pressed into Lucas's small palms. Father and son stood together now in the shape of one young man, a living answer to all the desert's cruelties. Lucas rested the rifle against his shoulder and looked out over the expanse. "They'll tell stories about this," he said, almost to himself. "Let them," she replied. "But we'll know the truth." A breeze stirred her hair, carrying the faint scent of mesquite bloom. She felt the weight of the night ease, replaced by something older than fear, the certainty that the land itself had accepted their stand. The canyon walls seemed to glow with quiet approval, their ancient faces turned to the rising sun. Some say that in years to come travelers spoke of a night when the desert rose to protect its own. They told of a widow who stood unbroken before iron men, and of a ghostly marksman whose bullets rode the storm. Around campfires and in dim saloons, the tale grew until it became legend, that Death himself had taken pity on a lone mother and sent her son's gun as his instrument. The railroad men never came again. Their maps left a blank space where the Price Ranch lay, as if the land refused to be named. Evelyn never sought to correct the storytellers. She and Lucas kept the ranch as it was, mending fences, raising cattle, living beneath the wide and merciless sky. Some nights, when the wind whispered through the canyons, she thought she heard Nathaniel's voice folded into the echo, proud and unyielding. And when the train whistle drifted from far horizons, it sounded less like a threat and more like a distant hymn, a reminder of the world they had chosen to face together. Mother and son stood that morning on the ridge until the sun climbed high, their shadows stretching long across the dust. Behind them the house stood firm, lantern still hanging in the window like a quiet star. Before them the golden canyon blazed with promise and memory. The legend of the Dust Widow began there, not with gunfire or blood, but with the enduring silence of two figures unbroken, holding their ground against the endless march of time.